back. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.
Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody. Help! You know I need someone. Help!
Welcome back to Boomer Life. Stirling Faux with you, joined in studio by George Abakhan and Brett Luckin, trustees both with Abakhan and Associates, consumer proposals and trustees in bankruptcies. We're talking about debt solutions, debt problems, and of course in the wake of the surprise announcement by the Bank of Canada to reduce interest rates a couple of weeks back, now we're looking around the internet, and some of our people have found on the Huffington Post just a couple of days ago that new search engine stuff. Brett, you do a lot of work on the net.
Yes.
Pay off debt searches hit a record high in the wake of this announcement by the Bank of Canada, which, according to this article, was supposed to entice us to buy more.
Right.
So not everyone is falling into the, let's take every spare shekel we get and spend it on stuff we don't necessarily need. Some people are searching pay off debt, attempting at least in some way to maybe connect the dots, a little extra cash, a greater opportunity to address debt issues, Brett.
Yeah, I look at that and I think to myself that perhaps another way to look at it is less that the decision by the bank may have resulted in more people looking for ways to pay off debt, and just because of where we are and the fact that people have too much debt, that the new year has brought people to thinking to themselves, I need to start doing something about my debt issues. And maybe it's concerning really that's the case, because it does indicate that more and more Canadians are looking at their personal financial situation and realizing it's not sustainable.
Well, George, at the beginning of the year, and they do this every year, all of the banks do their big surveys and so on, and they found CIBC's big survey lead story was the majority, the highest number of people surveyed responded that paying down debt would be their number one financial priority going into this new year. Now we're a month into it. A lot of resolutions have already evaporated, of course, but for some people, they actually did want to turn a page into 2015 and try in some way to address financial issues. Never a bad decision.
No, it's never a bad decision to try. Part of the problem is, excuse me, part of the problem is trying to make it happen. And you actually have to have enough wherewithal in your cash flow to be able to do it. Now, the opening music had help.
That's right.
Well, that's what we're here for.
Exactly. So
we're here to help, and we can offer alternatives. You don't have to go bankrupt.
Right.
And we can find solutions through the way we work the settlements that we make with the creditors. Most of the creditors are credit card companies or line of credits with the bank.
Right.
As I say, most of them, they're all in Toronto. Now we're here in BC. They don't fly out to us.
Right. They
want to vote on a settlement from the comfort of their desk, and that's what they'll do. If we offer them 25, 30 cents on the dollar, they generally accept. And we can, if a guy comes into me, he's got $50,000 worth of debt, I'll turn to him and I'll look at him and I'll say, you're probably paying $1,100 a month. And he says, oh, yeah, that's right, that's what I'm doing. About $1,200 actually. And I said, well, I can settle that for about $300 a month. And he'll say, you're on, tell me how.
Right. So let's find out about how, because that would, and this person who's come into you with these financial problems may have also, in the course of his initial remarks, indicated that he was here most likely to go bankrupt, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. I mean, generally speaking, most people say that. The thing about the consumer proposal and the way that it works is effectively what you're offering to your creditors is an option which is better than what they would get in a bankruptcy. That's effectively, if you were just to boil it all down, that is how it works. And so many people don't understand how bankruptcy works, and the trustee does. So what we would do is we would sit with you, and very quickly, inside 15 to 20 minutes, we can figure out what the returns of your creditors would be inside of bankruptcy, and therefore why a proposal that you offer them, and whatever that proposal payment is, would work well and would generally be accepted.
Can I stop you both, and before we get into the nuances and the differences between a proposal and a bankruptcy, and get back to an even more fundamental square one? What's the difference between what you, as professional, registered, licensed trustees, can do for a client versus a credit counselor or similar advisor? What's the big difference between, in other words, let me flip the question, what does a trustee do differently from other people in the field?
Well, I think the major difference, I mean, there's several differences, but the major difference is that when we make a settlement with the creditors, it's frozen. It's it. They can't come after the debtor. They can't sue them for additional amounts. If it's agreed, then whatever the term of the settlement is, that's what it is. If they've agreed to compromise $50,000 and the majority of the creditors agreed, then it's crammed down on the rest of the creditors and it's in. Whereas with a debt settlement or a credit counselor, generally they have very great difficulty in doing a wraparound credit settlement with all the creditors. And in any event, most of them, they can do some kind of settlement on the interest rates. In our situation, there is no interest period.
Okay.
From the date that they sign in, they don't have to pay any more interest. So long as they make the payments, they have a settlement. If they don't make the payments, then it comes unglued.
Right,
But that's
of course.
a separate issue.
Right.
The other thing is that credit counselors can't stop garnishees. They can't stop Revenue Canada. They can't stop litigation. Those are the principal ones. Is that
Are you
right?
are you an officer of the court, Brett, as a trustee?
Yes, we are. And in fact, that's the key thing to understand. Just as a basic overview to add to what George said, is that there is something known as the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. Which
Right,
is
it's federal, right?
It's a federal act. It
Right.
covers the whole of Canada. And we are effectively officers tasked to administer how the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act controls things like a bankruptcy and a consumer proposal.
All right.
And as trustees, we are the only ones who are qualified and certified to do that. So your credit counselors, debt settlement arrangers are not in a position to do that. So it gives us a lot of power. And as George says, an agreement by the majority of your creditors, 51% of your creditors, is binding on even the other 49%.
I see. Okay.
Which is not true, of course. If you were a credit counselor, you may find yourself doing business and negotiating separately with different creditors.
Now, with the consumer settlement process, consumer proposal, it's 51% of the dollars, not necessarily the creditors.
Oh, really?
So if the majority in dollars agrees, the rest of them are bound by it.
Even if it's owed to a minority of the creditors at the table, they with the most money approve, it's approved. And
Yeah.
that's the end of it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, even if they don't vote, if you get a proposal or a settlement offer that we've delivered out to everybody for, let's say, $50,000 and 5 creditors, and they don't vote, it passes.
Right.
So the creditors should vote, but if they don't vote and everything else is legit, then it goes through.
It's a deemed acceptance.
Interesting
and it's
stuff.
binding.
So, Brett, how long would it take you or one of your colleagues at Abakhan and Associates sitting down for a preliminary conversation with a very distressed person
Right.
that you've traveled to meet somewhere? How long does it, generally speaking, take you or any trustee to determine whether that individual sitting across the table from you is likely to need to go bankrupt or can quite easily accomplish a consumer proposal? How long does that evaluation take?
Worst case scenario, probably 15 to 20 minutes of dedicated time.
Really?
Sometimes you can do it a lot faster than that.
I wouldn't speak for other trustees,
No.
Okay.
just for our firm.
Just for our firm.
Okay.
You need to be able to understand that there's targeted questions. You're going to be asked those questions, and those targeted questions are: how much do you owe, and who do you owe that money to?
Okay.
What do you own? What are your assets? And what's the approximate value of some of those assets? And what your net income is at a household level, your household net income. There may be other little things which may play into that, but generally when I ask those questions, that tells me that there are other things I may need to ask you.
And we don't ask for any upfront fees.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a free.
we don't ask for any payment until we actually file the proposal or the settlement offer, or they go bankrupt.
But even then, George, when it's time for the client to pay, the fees are very strictly coded and enforced, again, as a function of the Bankruptcy Act, right?
Well, it's part of the calculation that's put on all trustees as to what we can have in accordance with their fee schedules out
Right.
of Ottawa.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not a case of you need to give me 2.5, find a way to do that. As a trustee, it's tariffed. There's a schedule of payment, how the trustee earns these fees, and that's always built into the calculation or the amount of money that we tell you need to pay.
Typically, if a person comes to one of you for an interview, and this generally, when you're on the verge of something catastrophic like, well, the end of your financial life as you know it, chances are you've been neglecting details for a while. So once this accumulation of neglect and stress sits across the desk from you, and it all comes pouring out, and you're able to assess whether that individual might qualify to file a proposal versus going bankrupt. How long does the actual process take? Once the person has been evaluated, and now we're going to go the consumer proposal route, or I'm afraid we're going to have to do the bankruptcy thing, how long from that point, George, does it actually take to resolve the process?
Well, probably 24, 48 hours, or even less. It depends how much information the person has, how readily it's available. Now, in the case of a proposal, it takes 45 days to get it formally approved.
Okay, that's all right.
So as soon as we file, then we have 45 days for the 30-cent proposal to be approved or deemed approval, because you don't actually have to go to court. There's a judicial deeming that takes place at the end of 45 days if it's over 50%. The bankruptcy, as soon as it's filed, it's in. Mm-hmm. It's done. As soon as we file, the person's bankrupt. Now, it may take a week to get the information in. It may take 24 hours to get the information.
Right.
We can turn it around very quickly.
You mentioned court, and I asked both of you whether you're officers of the court, to which you replied in the affirmative. Has it been your experience at all that in the past that some people are reluctant to sit down with a professional like yourselves because of the fact that you are officers of the court? And what happens if my name gets in the papers because I'm having some issues in my personal financial life? Has that been an impediment in some cases at all?
I don't think so.
I would say that well, first of all, what you need to understand is the vast majority of insolvencies that are filed, whether a bankruptcy or a proposal, there is no paper advert, there is no formal notice on TV or radio.
You know that, but most of us don't know that.
So the vast majority of those kinds of bankruptcies and proposals, no one's going to find out.
It's a private matter.
Other than the creditors, who obviously will be given notice based on the debt that you have with them.
Of course.
So that's a fear that really shouldn't concern people.
But people get pretty worked up, Brett.
They do. Also, when you come and see us, that first consultation is confidential at the level that the information you give me or one of our other trustees at that consultation is there to help you figure out whatever your options are that are available to you.
Of course.
But of course, much of that information then will become public to your creditors when you actually physically file.
Right.
But there's a point that we talked about before, is that that first meeting, it is like a confessional. You tell the trustee, tell me everything. Don't hide anything, because at the end of the day, I have to report to the creditors on your behalf.
Right.
So if you don't tell me something, and I find out later that you have another asset, for instance, that you didn't tell me about, then I have to go back to the creditors and tell them. So I have an onus to look after the creditor's interests to the extent of my knowledge of the debtor.
Right.
If the debtor tries to hide something, then it's a problem.
You mentioned that one of the big problems was, of course, someone not making their payments after all the arrangements had been worked out. But I suppose it's an even bigger problem if the arrangements had been made based on incomplete information. They omitted a few important details.
Well, if that happens, we would have to file maybe a new proposal or make a notice to the creditors that it's in default, or go to court. It's a default. People don't realize that we are officers of the court in most of the cases. They just understand that there's a process that we are able to handle for them. But at the same time, making misstatements, etc., is an offense under the Bankruptcy Act, and that can lead to severe penalties.
If I can interject here as well, what I also like to point out is that when people come and see us, after all, the whole point of doing that is you want to draw a line in the sand.
Yes.
This is the day that
enough already.
Enough already. I want to make a new start. I want to start this clock ticking differently now. I want to put a line in the sand in terms of my debt. And by, in fact, not giving full disclosure to your trustee, then what you're really doing is creating a situation where you are not drawing that line in the sand and creating in your own mind a sense of security and peace of mind that this is now a new phase for you in your life.
And the omission would, if you're confronting an individual who's in considerable financial distress, and that person doesn't tell you all of the important things in that confessional session, as you described at that first terribly important meeting, George, then there's this person doesn't stand much of a chance of actually resolving anything, do they?
No.
If they fudge on the numbers to the trustee, how on earth are they ever going to accomplish? They're just digging the hole deeper, aren't they?
Well, that's right. I mean, a proposal is a settlement with all the creditors, not some of the creditors.
Right. Okay. Let's take a quick break, and we'll get into more detail. We're talking the resolution of debt issues, solutions to debt problems, the two most prominent of which are the consumer proposal or the bankruptcy. Our guests from Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy and proposal administrators, are George Abakhan and Brett Luckin. I'm Sterling Faux. You're listening to Boomer Life here on CISL 650, and we'll be right back.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.